Hey everyone, welcome back to Game Informer. I'm Suriel Vasquez. I'm here with a group of developers who are going to show me their game. I'm here with...
Hi, I'm Jason Canham. I'm the founder and director of Household Games, Inc. And today we're showing off Way of the Passive Fist.
All right, and I'm also here with...
My name is Jeff Giffen. I'm the co-founder and tech director of Household Games.
So Jeff is going to be on the controls here, and Jason is going to talk to us about Way of the Passive Fist. So Jeff, whenever you're ready, make sure...
All right.
Go ahead.
Okay. Do you want to jump into the mapping first? You want to do some gameplay? Yeah. All right.
So we're going to just jump right into the game here. We're going to play the first chapter of the game that we've been presenting to people recently as the gameplay demo.
Right, and this is going to be at PAX, right? This demo?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
So this is what's going to be playable at PAX. It's going to be playable on the PlayStation 4.
All right.
On Xbox One, as well as a custom arcade cabinet that we've built as well.
Oh, cool.
Because it is an arcade-style game, it's designed as a 90s arcade brawler.
Right. You were telling me earlier that you can actually play the whole, like the game was designed around an arcade stick, right? So you can just play that with the classic 6-button setup.
It was exactly right. Yeah. When we were making early PlayStation 4 builds, whenever I would test out the latest build, I would always play it on the PS4 with my fight stick.
Right. So this is Way of the Passive Fist. As you can see, you're getting some of the tutorial messages here. And so the interesting thing is that it's basically sort of like a classic brawler, like, you know, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, X-Men, but it has more of a defensive focus. Can you talk some about like sort of what led you to implementing this kind of combat system?
Yeah, absolutely. In addition to brawlers, specifically licensed brawlers, I'm a big fighting game fan.
Sure.
And the game really fundamentally, it can be boiled down to starting that the initial idea for the game was moment 37 the game.
Right.
I'm a huge fan of defensive plays, and the Daigo parry is one of the defining moments of FGC.
Sure. So at some point, some enemy is gonna have, you know, the full Chun-Li super at some point.
We would love to. I mean, we may have to build to that. Like, as you can see, we
don't start there.
Yeah, getting people used to the game, because we found that it's really taking the concept and turning it on its head.
Right.
It has an element of counterintuitiveness to it.
Yeah. So you were telling me earlier about how people tend to play these brawlers with a sort of like a mashed mentality.
Exactly. And so we want to make sure we teach people that like mashing doesn't work. It is really timing and rhythm focused.
Sure.
And it's really just me trying to get across to players that playing defensive is awesome. Parries are awesome.
It's more timing. Like obviously you can see here, it's very much based on your timing, which I think is a pretty cool difference from most arcade style brawlers, because like that's kind of one of the reasons I don't think that genre has aged well, is because you kind of just at some point you figured out most of the enemies, and then most of the techniques you use is just pressing the square button or, you know, the 2 attack buttons. But I feel like this you do have to put a little bit more thought into it.
Yeah, exactly right. And it's a genre where not much has changed in quite a long time, like 20 plus years.
Sure.
And the genre hasn't evolved much beyond adding the occasional RPG element.
Right. There was a sort of that arcade sort of like heyday, and then I think at some point there was a resurgence, and then I think all of those games are dedicated to let's bring back that old spirit of the arcade games. And so you didn't see a lot of like, there were, you know, some layers added on top to it, but like the core combat seemed to have stayed the same.
Exactly right. And I think there's a lot to say to that you can say, hey, this is an old genre, it's really cool, and also show that there's new things you can do with it.
Right.
I mean, a genre is kind of a blank canvas. You can have roguelikes that are also Metroidvanias.
Sure.
You can have roguelikes that are RPGs.
Right.
So why can't you have brawlers that do more than just button mash combat?
Yeah, exactly. So like here we're showing off a little bit. So pretty much every time an enemy attacks you parry it, and there's you know, different difficulties which we'll get into later, but basically depending on when you do it, it'll give you a combo meter. And so you also have dodges, which work for different for other attacks. Sort of, we saw earlier there was a grappler, and sort of earlier there was a shuriken thrown at you. And so you can also level up as you would in like River City Ransom. And so there's also a dash here, which you can use to evade. One of the things you spoke to me earlier about was sort of accessibility, and how you guys really thought about a lot of that stuff. You guys even have a consultant, right?
We do. We've had a consultant for the entire length of the project, and our accessibility consultant actually started before we even had a playable build. We brought him on right from the beginning, even when the game was in its concept and pre-production phase. Because I just knew that I wanted to make a game that was different, and I wanted to make a game that everyone in the world, as many as people as possible, we could get to play. So we're trying to do everything we can to enable that.
Sure. And one of the things you also told me earlier was that there aren't any simultaneous inputs. And can you go into sort of why you guys went with that? I mean, obviously, it seems like the game is works well that way, but it seems like you guys made a conscious decision to make that sort of the case.
Sure. The game design itself lends itself to giving the player a relatively wide array of options for a brawler, that is. Like,
sure.
There's the parry, there's a dodge, there's a dash, and as well, there's also the utility check move, which allows you to push enemies around the battlefield. It doesn't do damage, but it lets you move them around so you can control the flow of the battle.
Okay.
Because it's all about the flow of the battle. And the purpose of that is that we give the player many options, but we're not really we're not having those options interact with each other. So it's like you have many buttons, but you never need more than one in any given situation.
Sure.
It's a matter of figuring out what situation am I in, what button do I need, and realizing to push that button.
Right. And how did you guys go about sort of designing some of these early enemies? Because some of this early level obviously has stuff that it's going to be on that's going to be more present later in the game versus when the game is actually released. The levels will be a little different, but did you guys have a specific process for designing each enemy, or?
Yeah, so the concept from the early days of planning the game, one of the first things we planned out was we created this cartoon universe because I'm a big fan of brawlers, Final Fight, Streets of Rage,
sure.
River City Ransom, but I'm an even bigger fan of the licensed ones, like you mentioned earlier, Turtles, X-Men, even the Simpsons one. So we kind of thought, let's make our very own cartoon universe and then make the game off of that. So we're saying if Way of the Passive Fist was a Saturday morning cartoon, which a lot of people have mentioned that we've been demoing the game recently at events. They look at our artwork, they look at the characters, and they say, it looks as if Mad Max were a cartoon.
Yeah.
And so we're like, if Mad Max were a Saturday morning cartoon, this is the arcade game that would have been released in arcades in 1991.
That's definitely a fair assessment. I definitely think that's the case.
So we have big villains who are like the leaders of these factions. And then the enemy design kind of came from being their minions. So some of the enemies you've seen are like desert raiders who scavenge the wastes and terrorize settlements. You have sun worshippers who...
all these different factions, yeah.
Yeah, and so basically they all take place in these different areas. They all have their own areas of the game that you'll eventually go to. But we just fundamentally designed all the characters in the game to have this Saturday morning cartoon feel.
And so, do you think does the plot follow that at all? Like, how much are you guys focusing on story here? I know though for the demo purposes we didn't really see much of that, but how much are you guys focusing on that stuff?
The game has, once again, kind of like with that Saturday morning cartoon feel, is that we want to feel like we're creating a wider universe, and the game itself is like one episode of this universe. So you can kind of imagine it's this cartoon, and what the game is like one of the episodes of the show.
Okay. So one of the things that I went to, my initial impression of, it being called Way of the Passive Fist, it felt like it was going to be completely sort of devoid of offense. Was the game ever at that point where you guys were trying to figure out a way to make combat work without any of the sort of offensive options that you currently have? You have a super fist that you can use once you have a certain combo meter.
So in the earliest prototype days, we started off just saying we want to be purely defensive. You can only parry enemies until they're tired and then knock them over. And we ran into a few challenges, the first of which being that it's not satisfying to beat a boss that way.
Yeah.
When you take down a boss, it has to be with a hit. And then also based out of the fact that we wanted to encourage players to get combos. And we wanted to reward them for very careful, efficient play. So we wanted to say, if you're careful, because the whole game is themed around all the enemies in the game are these maniacs that run at you, they attack, they expend their energy, and your character the one who stays calm in the storm.
Yeah.
So the gameplay is always focused around staying calm, let everyone around you tire themselves out, let them freak out, let them expend all their energy, and you save it for just the right moment.
Sure.
So basically, in an effort to let players kind of tackle bosses in a satisfying way, as well as encourage them to get combos and play skillfully, we kind of introduced a single offensive element.
Right.
And there is the power punch, which is the initial one you start with, But as you play through the game, you'll unlock other offensive abilities that can take multiple enemies out at once or defeat all the enemies in a fight.
Cool. So what other rewards would you get from leveling up? I know we noticed that we had the dash earlier and that you get different offensive options. So what other kind of bonuses do you get from leveling up?
While he was playing, you could notice in the HUD there was your health meter, and that had a couple locks that were locking out the full length of it, so you can increase your health.
Right.
You can basically kind of expand on your character. We're not focusing on making it very RPG-like. It's just kind of like we want to have the character grow
just a little bit of progression
as they kind of go through the game.
Cool.
Very reminiscent of, like you mentioned, River City Ransom and something like Mighty Final Fight. The NES port had kind of a very quick. It was only like your character only leveled up 5 times. But you got little bonuses just to kind of let you progress as you go through.
So one of the things I feel we should point out is the difficulty is different than from other games. Do you want to sort of dive into sort of why you sort of approached it from this very customizable segment?
Yeah, we thought of this very early on, and this came from working with our accessibility consultant. Who is half coordinated. He's a Twitch streamer and a speedrunner. And he's a really excellent proficient player, and he has a condition where he doesn't have coordination or feeling in the right side of his body, so he actually plays games with just the use of his left hand. So he gave us a lot of input, and one of the things that we had kind of our early conversations, we kind of approached things that we knew about, like, we know about color blindness, we know we should do something about that, we know that there are players that use controllers in non-traditional ways. We'll account for that. But he had brought a few things to light that we didn't really think of, which is players that have differing abilities of cognitive faculties. So that's players with slightly slower reaction times, slower reflexes, or can become easily overwhelmed with many things on screen at once. And we realize that those elements are often what are used to build difficulty levels. You make them stronger, you give more enemies to fight, or you make reaction times quicker and enemies attack faster. And based on his suggestion, we took those and we separated them into categories. So you can individually control how strong the enemies are, how many are on screen at once, how tight your actually parry window is, and how many helpful items you'll find in levels. Will there be many checkpoints? Will there be very few checkpoints? And you can control that. So that way, if any player is struggling with a particular game element, they're like, I can fight 1 or 2 guys at once, but I can't fight 10. Then you can simplify the encounters. Or if you're like, I'm being killed in 1 or 2 punches, or I really want to be able to take a lot of punches before I die, you can change that setting as well. Or if you want to improve a certain area, you're saying like, I want to fight 20 guys at once, but I don't want them to kill me in 1 or 2 punches. Then crank up the encounters, tune down the enemy strength, and you'll be fighting a ton of guys that are not so strong.
And one of the, if you can back out of the menu here, one of the other things is you mentioned as being important is catering to different styles of players by having sort of different controls. So like if you want to go into the options menu, you can pretty much map any controller. And you were telling me about some of the use cases that you guys had received feedback of.
Yes. So you can remap any function to any button, and that includes individual directional inputs on the D-pad, right stick, or left stick. So you can remap any function to anything, and this facilitates players who may have a non-traditional grip. They may hold a controller sideways vertically, or they may hold it upside down. Just based on how a person uses their body, whether they use their hands in a different way, or if they like to play with their feet, or if they need to play with their feet. You can actually change the game's controls to facilitate that. And you can do all kinds of combinations. If you remap all of the player's abilities to the D-pad and keep the movement on left stick and put one of the functions on the left trigger, you can now play the game completely left-handed with just one hand.
Nice.
You can do the same right-handed if you use the right stick and the face buttons, or you can remap the whole game to just the 2 sticks. And you can actually play without the use of any fingers or thumbs at all. You could just play with 2 individual digits, and you could theoretically play that with your feet or your toes. And I've tested these methods myself, and In some cases, I've had no trouble beating like a chapter of the game using this because you have the freedom to set it however you want.
Yeah, I feel like in recent years there's been a lot of accessibility options. We did a recent feature for the magazine about it, and we talked about Uncharted and how it was adding all these different options. But one thing I don't think I see a lot is letting you basically map the directional stuff, because I know in PC games that happens sometimes, but you were telling me earlier about someone who holds their controller vertically, and how being able to change what direction goes where, I think, was a big part of letting them play that the way they wanted.
Absolutely. And basically, by giving the absolute most freedom we can, we feel we're covering every case that we've yet thought of. And we're always open to players making suggestions to us, to offering their own insight. And if someone comes to us and contacts us and says, I play the game this way, we will see what we can do about it. We can't make necessary promises, but we would love to be able to accommodate for as many players as we can. But we've tried to open it up to be as comprehensive and give as much freedom as we possibly can.
Cool. Well, that's A Way of the Passive Fist. You guys are launching when? On what platforms?
We're going to be launching the game on PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and PC Mac Linux on Steam.
Okay.
Right now, we're planning for an early 2018 release.
All right. Well, thank you so much for speaking to me today. Look forward to the game.
Thank you very much for taking the time out to talk today. Appreciate it.
Thank you.